You've probably seen Braveheart. You remember Mel Gibson as William Wallace, face painted blue and white, roaring freedom at the top of his lungs before a heroic, defiant death. It's a powerful scene, an iconic moment in cinema. But like so many things Hollywood touches, it's a sanitized, almost romantic version of a reality that was far, far darker. The truth of William Wallace's end is not a story of noble sacrifice. It's a story of calculated, state-sponsored terror, a spectacle of pain designed to break the spirit of a nation. This wasn't just an execution. It was England's ultimate, horrifying revenge. To understand the sheer brutality of what happened to Wallace, you have to understand the man who ordered it, King Edward I of England, also known as Edward Longshanks, and more chillingly, the Hammer of the Scots. Edward was a formidable, ruthless monarch. He saw Scotland not as a neighboring kingdom, but as a rebellious territory to be brought to heel. And William Wallace was the living embodiment of that rebellion. Wallace wasn't royalty. He was a commoner, a knight who rose from obscurity to lead a guerrilla war against the most powerful army in Europe. His victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge was a stunning humiliation for England. He had proven that the English war machine was not invincible. For Edward, this wasn't just a military problem, it was a personal insult. Wallace had to be made an example of, and his punishment had to be so terrible, so unforgettable, that no one would ever dare follow in his footsteps. After years of being hunted, Wallace was finally captured in 1305, betrayed by a fellow Scot. He was transported to London, not for a trial in the modern sense, but for a show. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. He was a traitor, and in medieval England, the punishment for high treason was the most agonizing death the state could devise. The nightmare began on August 23rd, 1305. Wallace was stripped down and tied to a wooden hurdle. He wasn't placed on a horse. He was dragged by horses for miles. The journey from the Tower of London to Smithfield, the public execution ground, was a deliberate parade of humiliation. The streets were packed with Londoners, encouraged to come out and witness the downfall of England's greatest enemy. They threw garbage, rocks, and animal filth at him. He was pelted and cursed, his body scraped raw against the cobblestones for over 4 miles. This was the first part of the punishment, public degradation. They wanted to strip him of his dignity, to turn the heroic leader of the Scots into a pathetic, broken figure before the real horror even began. When he finally arrived at Smithfield, barely conscious, he was hoisted onto a scaffold for all to see. He was alive, but only just. The crowd wasn't silent. They were jeering, baying for blood. This was medieval entertainment. Standing before him was the executioner, not with a simple axe, but with a collection of gruesome tools. The sentence was read aloud, accusing him of treason, murder, and sacrilege. Wallace denied being a traitor, famously declaring he had never sworn allegiance to the English king. His defiance, even in this broken state, likely sealed his fate and fueled the cruelty that was to come. Then the true ordeal started. First, he was hanged, but this was not a quick, neck-snapping drop. He was pulled up by a rope, slowly strangling, kicking and gasping for air. The point wasn't to kill him, but to bring him to the very edge of death, to make him feel the life being choked out of him, only to be cut down just before he passed out. He crashed to the scaffold floor, alive, conscious and aware of everything that was about to happen. What followed is almost too gruesome to describe, but it's essential to understanding the message Edward was sending. While Wallace was still alive, pinned down on the scaffold, the executioner took a knife. They performed an emasculation. This was a symbolic act, meant to rob him of his manhood, to suggest he was no longer a man capable of fathering more rebels. Then, the executioner sliced his abdomen open. In a procedure known as evisceration, his intestines and internal organs were pulled out of his body. And here is the most sadistic detail of all. They were thrown onto a fire right in front of his face. He was forced to watch himself being disemboweled. Can you even begin to imagine that level of agony and psychological torture? The man from Braveheart didn't die shouting a single defiant word. The historical accounts suggest he died screaming in unimaginable pain. But even his death wasn't the end. The king's revenge was meticulous. After he finally expired from the blood loss and shock, the executioner took an axe and beheaded him. His head was then dipped in tar to preserve it and impaled on a spike above London Bridge. It was the most prominent public space in the city, a constant, rotting reminder to everyone who entered London. This is the price of defying the king. The rest of his body was then subjected to the final part of the sentence, quartering. His corpse was hacked into 4 pieces. And this is where the message went national. Each piece was sent to a different corner of Britain, to a major town that had seen Scottish rebellion. One arm went to Newcastle, another to Berwick, one leg to Perth, and the other to Aberdeen. His body parts were displayed publicly in these cities as a grisly warning. The message was clear and written in blood and bone. No matter where you are, no matter how far from London, the king's reach is long, and his wrath is absolute. King Edward's plan was to literally and figuratively erase William Wallace. By scattering his body, he thought he could destroy the man and the symbol. But he achieved the exact opposite. This act of supreme cruelty didn't crush the Scottish spirit, it ignited it. The horror of Wallace's execution turned him from a rebel leader into a national martyr. The story of his brutal end spread like wildfire, fueling a renewed and even more determined fight for independence. Instead of an ending, Wallace's death became a beginning. Robert the Bruce, a Scottish noble who had previously wavered, was inspired by Wallace's martyrdom and took up the cause, eventually leading Scotland to victory and independence at the Battle of Bannockburn. In his attempt to make an example of William Wallace, to carve a warning in blood, King Edward the Vasan accidentally created an immortal legend. He wanted to erase Wallace's name from history, but in the end the savagery of his revenge ensured that the name William Wallace would be remembered forever, not just as a rebel, but as the soul of Scotland's fight for freedom. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this dive into the dark side of history as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories they didn't teach you in school. Let me know in the comments what you think about this brutal piece of history. See you next time.